Honor 600 Pro is probably the most confusing phone I've looked at this year. And looking from it across the room, you'd probably think iPhone, right? A design choice that definitely wasn't by accident. But after spending some time with the Honor 600 Pro, I've realized one thing. Apple shouldn't be worried about the copied design. What should actually scare them is how this feels less like an iPhone 17 and more like an iPhone 17 Pro Max for an iPhone 17 price. What is Honor actually doing here? The reason I mentioned the design is because Honor definitely copied Apple's homework here. They said they looked at what the market wants, and apparently that's just an iPhone 17 Pro Max. The shape, the camera bump, even the colors, really familiar. But I think the biggest difference shows up when you actually pick it up. All the ingredients are here. The aluminium body, a glass back, a pretty solid build quality. The difference is the polish though, the execution. Where Apple blends the back into what almost feels like a single design piece, this has more of a standard design. It's built well, just not quite as comfortable as the iPhone. It feels much closer to an iPhone 17, which honestly makes sense considering the price tag. And that really sums up this design. It looks like a Pro Max, but the execution feels more like the iPhone 17. And that's not bad, it's just not as polished. Now flipping it over though, that's where it gets really similar. You're getting a 6.57-inch 120Hz 1.5K AMOLED display. It's not 4K or anything extreme, but it's much sharper than Full HD. And in real-world use, it looks just as crisp as the iPhone. As expected, it's nice and snappy. It's running on the Snapdragon 8 Elite chip. You're getting a minimum of 12 GB of RAM, and although there is a 16 GB, 1 TB version, this is basically doubling what you'd get on the iPhone 17. Everything feels fast and smooth, and unless your hobby is benchmarking phones, you probably won't even notice the difference that much. Gaming performance is pretty solid too, running games like NTE maxed out at a respectable 60 frames per second while barely getting hot. I'd comfortably say that while this phone isn't running the newest chip on the market, you should be fine for a couple of years before it starts getting slow. Probably more than a couple of years. But none of this is what makes the Honor 600 Pro stand out, to be honest. What I think separates this from the iPhone 17 is the camera setup. This phone takes the idea that you need to pay insane premium amounts for good cameras and throws that out the window. It honestly solidly competes with the Pro Max. You're looking at a 200 megapixel main camera, a 50 megapixel telephoto with 3.5x optical zoom, and the weakest part of it all, the not so great 12 megapixel ultra wide. But I've said it before and I'll say it again, megapixels don't mean much. It's the sensor that matters, and Honor seems to know that. By using a bigger 1 1/4 inch sensor for the main 200 megapixel camera, they ended up with something that feels much closer to the iPhone 17 Pro Max than I'm comfortable with. Look at these two videos side by side and tell me which one you think comes from the Honor and which one from the iPhone. Now, if you're thinking the yellowish one is the Honor, you're absolutely wrong. I know, right? The ultra-wide and the telephoto, though, aren't really on the same level as the main camera, but they have built in an entire separate color spectrum sensor to help the phone figure out ambient lighting and colors, instead of guessing it based on only what you get from the image on the main camera sensor. In general, I do think it makes a pretty big difference. It's not perfect, and honestly, coming from someone who's had clips on my iPhone Pro Max that changed color multiple times during one shoot, I think Apple should take some notes from the Honor 600 Pro. Now obviously there are some points where the camera still falls behind the Pro Max, but I feel like it's in less noticeable areas. If you don't need ProRes 4K slow motion, the Pro 600 is more than what's good. And honestly, that's what makes this phone so interesting. It doesn't just beat the regular iPhone 17 in a few areas, it makes you compare it with the Pro Max. And for a phone at this price, that's something that shouldn't really happen.